In 1901, a 60-year-old man pushed through a crowd outside the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. He was carrying a petition, a document he had spent years trying to deliver through official channels, only to be ignored, dismissed, and silenced. The man's name was Tanaka Shozo, Tianzhong Zhao. He had been a member of Japan's parliament. He had given speeches. He had asked questions. He had done everything the system allowed, and nothing had changed. So he resigned his seat and tried to hand his petition directly to Emperor Meiji in front of thousands of witnesses. He was stopped before he could reach the emperor. The petition was never formally received, and the disaster he was trying to stop, the systematic poisoning of an entire river valley, the destruction of farms and forests. Welcome back to Lost Japan. Today we're going to Ashio Copper, a mountain town in Tochigi Prefecture about 2 hours north of Tokyo, a place that was, for a brief period, one of the most productive copper mines on Earth, and a place whose name became synonymous with something Japan had never confronted before: the idea that industrial progress could poison a nation's own land, water, and people. Copper has been mined in the mountains of Ashio since at least 1610, the early Edo period when Japan was still ruled by shoguns and samurai. For most of those centuries, the mine was a modest operation, worked by small groups of miners using hand tools. That changed dramatically in 1877 when a businessman named Furukawa Ichibei, Guhei Shibingwei, acquired the mine and began pouring capital into modernization. Furukawa brought in steam engines, better ventilation, and aggressive expansion. Within a decade, Ashio was producing more copper than any other mine in Asia, supplying roughly 40% of Japan's total copper output at its peak, and Japan needed copper urgently. The Meiji government was industrializing at extraordinary speed, building telegraph lines, railways, weapons, ships. Copper was infrastructure. Copper was power. Furukawa was celebrated. His company, which would eventually become the Furukawa Corporation, Guhei Kaifa, was one of the pillars of Japan's industrial transformation. Ashio, the town, boomed alongside the mine. Workers flooded in. At its peak in 1916, roughly 38,000 people lived in and around the town, making it larger than many Japanese cities. There were theaters, shops, brothels, schools. The mountain town had electric lights before most of rural Japan even knew what electricity was. For the people who owned the mine and for the government officials who celebrated its output, Ashio was a success story, a symbol of what modern Japan could achieve. But downstream, along the Waterace River, Duliang-Laichuan, a very different story was unfolding. The warning signs came early. In the late 1870s, almost immediately after Furukawa began large-scale operations, farmers along the Waterace River started noticing something wrong. The fish were dying. The water had a strange smell and color. Rice crops, which had thrived for generations in the river's floodplain, began to fail. The culprit was copper tailings, the toxic waste generated by ore processing, along with sulfur dioxide from the mine's smelting operations. The smoke from the smelters stripped the mountains of Ashio bare. The trees died. Without vegetation, erosion accelerated. Every time it rained, sulfuric acid and heavy metals washed directly into the Waterace. The river carried the poison south through Tochigi, Gunma, Saitama, and Ibaraki prefectures, an area of roughly 1,600 square kilometers. Floods in 1890 and 1896 spread the contamination across tens of thousands of hectares of farmland. Crops failed, livestock died, and the people who depended on that land began to get sick, experiencing symptoms that doctors couldn't explain and that the authorities refused to acknowledge as related to the mine. Farmers organized. They marched to Tokyo in protests that, for their time, were extraordinary acts of defiance. Peasant farmers confronting one of Japan's most powerful industrial conglomerates and, implicitly, the government that protected it. The response from authorities was largely suppression. Protests were broken up. Leaders were arrested. The official position was that there was insufficient evidence to connect the mine's operations to the downstream damage. Enter Tanaka Shozo, Tianzhong Zhao. Tanaka was a politician from Tochigi. Elected to Japan's first parliament in 1890. He became the most relentless voice in the national legislature on the Ashio issue, delivering speech after speech, asking question after question, refusing to let the issue be quietly buried under procedural maneuvers. He was met with stonewalling, indifference, and derision. His fellow parliamentarians grew tired of hearing about dying farmers and poisoned rivers. Japan had warships to build and an empire to expand. The Ashio Copper Mine was not a problem. It was an asset. In 1901, having exhausted every formal avenue, Tanaka resigned his parliamentary seat and attempted, but the government did eventually act in a way that revealed its priorities with brutal clarity. The solution proposed for the flooding and contamination was to build a massive retention reservoir, a place where floodwaters could be held back and sediment could settle before the water continued downstream. The Water-Ace Reservoir, Duliang La Yu Shui Chi. There was one problem. Sitting precisely where the reservoir needed to be built was a village called Yanaka, Gujong-kun. Population, roughly 2,700 people, a farming community with roots going back centuries. The government's solution was simple: erase the village. Between 1902 and 1906, authorities used a combination of buyouts, legal pressure, and outright coercion to force Yanaka's residents off their land. The village was officially dissolved in 1906. Holdouts, a small group who refused to leave, were forcibly removed. Their homes were demolished. The land was flooded. Tanaka Shozo moved into Yanaka in its final years, living in solidarity with the remaining residents and continuing to write and agitate until his death in 1913. He died with almost nothing. His will consisted of a few coins, a notebook, and a worn piece of cloth. The Yanaka story did not end there. Decades later, former residents and their descendants organized to preserve the memory of the village that had been literally submerged, holding ceremonies, placing markers, telling their story. Today, the ruins of Yanaka's old church occasionally surface during dry seasons when the water level drops. It's a ghost beneath a ghost. Meanwhile, the mine continued operating. Copper production declined after World War I, but Ashio kept running on reduced output for decades. The Furukawa Corporation, profitable and connected, faced no meaningful legal. Today, Ashio is a quiet, diminished mountain town. The population has shrunk from its peak of 38,000 to roughly 1,800. Shops are closed. Streets that once bustled are empty. The mountains around Ashio, once stripped bare by sulfur smoke, are slowly greening again after more than a century of reforestation efforts. Slowly. The damage was so severe that it set back soil development by generations, and some areas remain fragile. Part of the old mine has been converted into a tourist attraction, the Ashio Copper Mine Museum, Zuweitong Shanguanguang. You can ride a small cart into the mine tunnels and see recreations of mining life from different eras. It's educational, if a little sanitized. The museum focuses on the industrial achievement. The ecological disaster is present but not foregrounded. The Water-Ace Reservoir, built over Yanaka village, is now a nature reserve. Ironic, perhaps, or fitting, depending on your perspective. Tanaka Shozo is remembered. There are statues. His writings are studied. The term Ashio Copper Mine Pollution Incident, Zuwei Kwang Du Shijian, appears in every Japanese school textbook as the country's first major industrial pollution disaster, a case study in what happens when economic interests override everything else. But the people whose farms were destroyed, whose bodies were poisoned, whose village was erased from the map, The Ashio story sits at the beginning of a thread that runs through all of modern industrial history. The question of who bears the cost of progress. Japan would face this question again and again, in the mercury poisoning at Minamata, Shuiyu, in the cadmium contamination of the Jinzu River that caused Itai disease, Itai Bing, in the industrial air pollution of the high-growth era. Each time a pattern, profits captured by corporations and celebrated by the state, costs externalized onto the communities least able to fight back. Tanaka Shozo understood something in 1890 that his government did not want to hear, that a nation which poisons its own rivers is not in fact progressing. He spent his life saying so. History eventually agreed with him. If this kind of story is what you come here for, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.